Wealthy heir falls for a maid, his family's reaction will leave you speechless. The rain pattered softly against the tall windows of the Sterling family estate, casting a faint sheen over the sprawling gardens below. From his room on the second floor, Lucas Sterling leaned against the glass, his thoughts far from the wealth and privilege that surrounded him. Downstairs, the hum of activity carried on. Maids preparing for yet another gala, chefs bustling in the kitchen to craft the perfect dishes, and his mother overseeing every detail with her characteristic precision. Lucas sighed. For as long as he could remember, this life of luxury had felt hollow. He had everything money could buy, yet it never seemed to be enough. His family's expectations loomed over him like a shadow, always present, always demanding. Lucas, his mother's voice rang out from the hallway. He turned reluctantly as the door swung open. "We need you downstairs," she said, her tone brisk. "You'll be meeting the Finleys tonight. Their daughter, Veronica, is exactly the kind of person you should be associating with." "I'll be down in a minute," Lucas replied, his voice neutral. His mother gave him a sharp look before nodding and leaving the room. Lucas lingered for a moment, his gaze drifting back to the gardens. If only there were a way to escape this world, even for a little while. In the staff quarters, Sarah adjusted her uniform in front of the small mirror. The black and white dress wasn't flattering, but it was clean and functional. She pulled her hair back into a neat bun, making sure no strands were out of place. First impressions mattered, especially in a household like this. "Ready for the circus?" her co-worker, Anna, teased as she passed by. "Barely," Sarah replied with a small smile. "Let's just hope tonight goes smoothly." Sarah had been working at the estate for only a few weeks, but she'd quickly learned that the Sterlings were a family of perfectionists. Any mistake, no matter how small, was noted and scrutinized. But she didn't have the luxury of complaints. This job was a lifeline, one that helped her send money back home to her siblings and keep her dreams of a better future alive. As she stepped into the grand dining room, the magnitude of the evening hit her. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the polished table set for 30, and every detail screamed opulence. Sarah took her position by the wall, ready to assist when needed. She was determined to remain invisible, just another part of the background. But then Lucas walked in. Their first meeting was fleeting. Lucas entered the room, exchanging polite greetings with the guests his mother introduced. His charm was effortless, his smile practiced. He was everything the Sterlings expected him to be, except his eyes betrayed something deeper, something restless. When his gaze landed on Sarah, it lingered for a fraction longer than it should have. She quickly looked away, focusing on the tray in her hands. Lucas, too, turned back to the conversation, but the brief moment stuck with him. As the night went on, Sarah's efficiency caught Lucas's attention. While other staff members moved mechanically, Sarah seemed to approach her tasks with quiet pride. When she thought no one was looking, she allowed herself a small smile as she set down a perfectly arranged dish or poured a glass of wine without spilling a drop. By the end of the evening, Lucas couldn't resist seeking her out. He found her in the library, stacking books onto a cart. "You seem busy," he said casually, leaning against the doorframe. Sarah startled slightly but quickly composed herself. "Just finishing up for the night, sir." "Lucas," he corrected, stepping inside. "No need for formalities." Sarah hesitated. "Is there something you need?" "Lucas?" "Not really," he admitted, his tone light. "I just noticed you working earlier. You're very meticulous." She blinked, unsure how to respond. "Thank you. I try my best." Lucas studied her for a moment, intrigued by her calm demeanor. "Do you enjoy working here?" Sarah gave a cautious smile. "It's a job. Pays the bills." Her honesty caught him off guard. Most people he interacted with were either sycophants or rivals, always angling for something. But Sarah was different, grounded, unpretentious. "Well, if you ever need anything, let me know," Lucas said before leaving her to her work. As he walked back to his room, he found himself thinking about her more than he expected. Over the following days, Lucas and Sarah's paths crossed more often. At first, their conversations were brief, polite exchanges in the hallway or passing comments during events. But as Lucas grew bolder, their interactions deepened. "You read a lot," he noted one afternoon when he found her in the library again. "It's my way of escaping," Sarah replied, glancing up from the novel in her hands. "Stories let me imagine a different life." "What kind of life?" Lucas asked, genuinely curious. Sarah hesitated, then said, "One where I have the freedom to choose my own path." Her words struck a chord with Lucas. He, too, longed for freedom, though his circumstances were vastly different. They talked for a while, sharing thoughts about books, dreams, and the world beyond the estate. For Lucas, these conversations became a rare source of authenticity in his otherwise performative life. But not everyone approved of their growing connection. Sarah began noticing the subtle shifts in the way the other staff treated her. Anna, once friendly, now kept her distance. Whispers followed her through the hallways, and she often caught disapproving glances from the senior housekeeper. "Be careful," Anna warned her one evening. "People are noticing." "Noticing what?" Sarah asked, though she already knew. "Your little chats with Lucas," Anna said. "It's not our place to get close to them. You know that?" Sarah nodded, her chest tightening. She hadn't meant for this to happen. Lucas was kind, yes, but she couldn't afford to risk her position. She resolved to keep her distance. But Lucas had other plans. Lucas noticed almost immediately when Sarah started avoiding him. She no longer lingered in the library or returned his smiles in passing. Her answers to his questions were curt, polite, and devoid of the warmth he had come to look forward to. For someone used to effortless charm and attention, her distance felt like a rejection. One evening, he found her in the garden, quietly watering a row of neatly trimmed hedges. The setting sun cast a golden glow over the estate, and for a moment, Lucas simply watched her work. There was something calming about her presence, something that drew him in despite her attempts to push him away. "You're avoiding me," he said finally, stepping closer. Sarah froze, gripping the watering can tightly. "I'm just doing my job." "That's not what I mean, and you know it," Lucas replied, his voice steady but not unkind. "Did I do something wrong?" Sarah sighed, setting the watering can down. "It's not about you, Lucas. It's about this. Whatever this is. People are talking, and I can't afford to lose this job." Lucas frowned. "Why should it matter what people think? We're just talking." "That's easy for you to say," Sarah shot back, her tone sharper than she intended. "You don't have to worry about people questioning your motives or accusing you of things just because you were nice to someone like me." Her words stung, not because they were untrue, but because they exposed the chasm between their worlds. Lucas hadn't considered how his actions might affect her, how their connection, however innocent, could jeopardize everything she had worked for. "I didn't mean to put you in a difficult position," he said quietly, "but I meant what I said before. If you ever need anything, I'm here." Sarah looked at him, her expression softening. "Thank you. But sometimes, it's better to keep our distance." Lucas nodded reluctantly, watching as she picked up the watering can and walked away. For the first time, he felt the weight of the expectations and privilege he had always taken for granted. He couldn't ignore the growing feelings he had for Sarah, but he also couldn't ignore the consequences their connection might bring. Meanwhile, Lucas's mother, Eleanor, was beginning to notice her son's distracted behavior. He had always been the golden boy, the one who charmed guests at parties, followed her carefully laid plans, and rarely caused trouble. But lately he seemed distant, preoccupied. "Lucas," she said one afternoon as they sat in the drawing room, the sunlight streaming through the tall windows. "Is something on your mind?" Lucas hesitated, knowing how much his mother valued control and propriety. "Nothing important," he replied, forcing a smile. Eleanor wasn't convinced. "You've been spending a lot of time wandering around the estate lately. I hope you're not getting too comfortable with the staff." Her words were pointed, and Lucas's jaw tightened. "I talk to people, Mother. It's called being human." Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "Be careful, Lucas. People notice these things, and appearances matter. You have responsibilities. Our family's reputation isn't something to take lightly." Lucas bit back a retort, choosing instead to excuse himself from the conversation. But his mother's words lingered, fueling his frustration. For once, he wanted to make a choice that wasn't dictated by wealth, status, or expectations. That frustration boiled over during a dinner party hosted by the Sterlings. The Finleys were among the guests, and Veronica, the socialite Lucas's mother had been pushing him toward, was seated next to him. She was beautiful, poised, and undeniably charming, but Lucas found himself tuning out her carefully rehearsed anecdotes and polite laughter. Across the room, Sarah moved quietly, clearing plates and refilling glasses. She avoided Lucas's gaze, but he couldn't help glancing in her direction. When one of the guests, an older man with a booming voice, called out for more wine, Sarah stepped forward to pour it. "Careful, dear," the man said, his tone condescending. "You don't want to spill on the tablecloth. That's probably worth more than your monthly salary." A ripple of laughter followed his comment, but Lucas's expression darkened. He stood abruptly, drawing the room's attention. "That's enough," he said, his voice sharp. The room fell silent, and all eyes turned to him. The older man looked startled. "I was just joking." "It wasn't funny," Lucas said firmly. "The people who work here deserve our respect, not cheap remarks." Sarah froze, her heart pounding. She couldn't decide whether to be grateful for Lucas's defense or mortified by the attention it had drawn. Eleanor's lips pressed into a thin line, her disapproval evident. "Lucas," she said coolly, "why don't you sit down?" Lucas ignored her, his gaze sweeping the room. Maybe it's time we all remembered that wealth doesn't make us better than anyone else. Without waiting for a response, he turned and left the room, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. Later that night, Lucas found Sarah in the staff quarters, packing her belongings into a small suitcase. "What are you doing?" he asked, panic creeping into his voice. "I can't stay here," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "After tonight, I'm a liability. Your mother's going to find a reason to fire me anyway, so I might as well leave on my own terms." "You don't have to do this," Lucas pleaded. "I'll talk to her, and what good will that do?" Sarah replied, her eyes filling with tears. "This isn't your fight, Lucas. It's mine, and I need to protect myself." Lucas took a step closer, his voice softening. "You don't have to do it alone. Let me help you." Sarah shook her head, her resolve firm. "You've already helped me more than you know, but this is something I need to do for myself." Lucas watched helplessly as she zipped up the suitcase and walked past him, her footsteps echoing down the hallway. He wanted to stop her, to find the right words to make her stay, but none came. Sarah stood outside the estate, the cool night air brushing against her face as she took one last look at the towering mansion. It was a place she had come to know intimately, a labyrinth of luxury that often felt suffocating. But now, as she clutched her suitcase, it felt like a weight had been lifted. Leaving wasn't easy, but it was necessary. She made her way to the train station, her thoughts a swirling mix of fear and determination. Starting over wasn't new to her. She'd done it before and she could do it again. But this time, it wasn't just about survival. It was about reclaiming her independence and her dreams. Lucas paced his room, his frustration mounting with every step. He replayed the scene from the dinner party in his mind, the condescending laughter, his mother's cold reprimand, and the look in Sarah's eyes as she packed her things. He had never felt so powerless. Eleanor entered without knocking, her expression stern. "What were you thinking, Lucas?" "I was thinking someone needed to stand up for her," he shot back. "That man was out of line." Eleanor's jaw tightened. "And in doing so, you embarrassed our family. Do you have any idea how hard I've worked to maintain our reputation?" Lucas met her gaze, his voice firm. "Maybe that's the problem. You're more concerned about appearances than doing what's right." Eleanor's expression flickered with something Lucas couldn't quite place. Anger, perhaps, or maybe regret. "You're young, Lucas. You don't understand how the world works." "Maybe I don't want to," he said, his voice softer now. "Maybe I want to be better than that." Eleanor sighed, shaking her head. "If you're determined to throw everything away for some infatuation, then so be it. But don't expect me to support it." With that, she left, leaving Lucas alone with his thoughts. Sarah arrived in the city the next morning, her suitcase in one hand and her heart heavy with uncertainty. She found a small room to rent in a modest building and quickly began looking for work. The first few days were grueling, hours spent walking from one place to another, filling out applications, and enduring polite rejections. But Sarah was nothing if not determined. By the end of the week, she had secured a job at a local bookstore. It wasn't glamorous, but it was enough to pay the bills. And for the first time in a long time, she felt like she had space to breathe. The bookstore quickly became her sanctuary. Surrounded by shelves of stories, she found solace in the familiar comfort of books. Her co-workers were kind, and her boss, an older woman named Margaret, took an immediate liking to her. "You've got a good head on your shoulders," Margaret said one afternoon as they unpacked a shipment of new arrivals. "And a good heart. You'll go far if you stick with it." Sarah smiled, her confidence slowly returning. "Thank you. That means a lot." Back at the estate, Lucas was struggling to adapt to life without Sarah. The house felt emptier, the conversations duller. He threw himself into work, hoping to distract himself from the ache in his chest. But no matter how busy he kept himself, he couldn't stop thinking about her. One evening, while reviewing financial reports in his father's study, Lucas came across an old family ledger. Flipping through its pages, he saw the records of countless charitable donations and community projects, initiatives spearheaded by his grandfather, who had once been a beloved figure in the town. Inspired, Lucas decided to revive those efforts. He began visiting local organizations, meeting with community leaders, and learning about the challenges they faced. It was a world he had never been exposed to, and it humbled him. During one of these visits, he stopped by a nonprofit that supported small businesses. As he walked through their resource center, he spotted Sarah in the corner, deep in conversation with a staff member. For a moment, he simply watched her. She looked different, happier, more at ease. But the sight of her also reignited the feelings he had tried to suppress. Gathering his courage, Lucas approached her. "Sarah," she turned, her expression a mix of surprise and hesitation. "Lucas, what are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing," he said, smiling gently. "But I'm glad to see you." Sarah crossed her arms, her guard going up. "If you're here to convince me to come back." "I'm not," Lucas interrupted, his tone earnest. I wanted to see how you were doing." Sarah hesitated, then said, "I'm doing fine. Better, actually. I'm working at a bookstore and saving up to start my own business." Lucas's eyes lit up. "That's amazing. What kind of business?" "A bookstore and cafe," Sarah said, her voice softening. "It's something I've always dreamed of." Lucas nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "You'll make it happen. I know you will." For a moment, the tension between them eased. They talked about her plans, the challenges she was facing, and the progress Lucas had made with his community projects. Felt like old times, easy, comfortable, and honest. But as the conversation wound down, Sarah's walls went back up. "Lucas, I appreciate you checking in, but I need to do this on my own." "I understand," he said, though his heart ached at the thought of walking away. "But if you ever need anything, you know where to find me." Sarah nodded, watching as he turned and left. She wanted to believe he had changed, but trust wasn't something she could give easily anymore. The days turned into weeks, and Sarah focused all her energy on her work and her future. Every paycheck went toward her savings, and every spare moment was spent refining her business plan. She sketched out designs for the bookstore cafe, listing everything from the type of chairs she wanted to the menu of pastries and drinks. Margaret noticed her dedication and often stayed after hours to help. "You remind me of myself when I was your age," she said one evening, handing Sarah a cup of tea. Ambitious, stubborn, and not afraid to dream big, Sarah smiled, touched by the compliment. "I just hope I can make it happen." "You will," Margaret said firmly. "You've got the heart for it, and the grit." Encouraged by Margaret's support, Sarah began attending networking events hosted by the nonprofit. There, she met other aspiring entrepreneurs and learned about grants and loans available to small business owners. Slowly but surely, Her dream was coming into focus. Meanwhile, Lucas was making changes of his own. His work with the community had become a priority, and he found himself spending less time at the estate and more time in town. He met local business owners, attended town hall meetings, and listened to the concerns of people who had long been overlooked by his family. One evening, he sat down with his father to discuss his plans. "You've been busy," his father said, eyeing the documents Lucas had brought. "What's all this?" "Proposals for community initiatives," Lucas said. "I want to use some of our family's resources to support local businesses and education programs." His father frowned. "And how does this benefit us?" "It's not about us," Lucas replied, his tone steady. "It's about doing the right thing." Grandfather understood that. He built this family's legacy on more than just wealth. His father sighed, clearly unconvinced. "Your mother won't like this." "I know," Lucas said, "but I'm not asking for permission." For the first time, Lucas felt like he was stepping out of his family's shadow. It was liberating and terrifying. One afternoon, Lucas walked into the bookstore where Sarah worked, carrying a small package. She looked up from the counter, her expression wary but curious. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "I have something for you," he said, placing the package on the counter. Sarah hesitated before opening it. Inside was a beautifully bound leather journal with her name embossed on the cover. She ran her fingers over the smooth surface, her heart softening despite herself. "It's for your business ideas," Lucas said. "I thought you might need a place to organize everything." "Thank you," Sarah said quietly. "It's thoughtful." "I just wanted to help," Lucas said. "No strings attached." "Promise?" Sarah studied him for a moment, trying to gauge his sincerity. He looked different, not just in appearance, but in the way he carried himself. There was a quiet determination in his eyes, a humility she hadn't seen before. "I appreciate it," she said finally, "but I still need to do this on my own." "I understand," Lucas said, his voice soft, "but if there's ever anything I can do, just let me know." With that, he left, leaving Sarah with the journal in her hands and a mix of emotions in her heart. Lucas's visits became less frequent after that, but he continued to keep an eye on Sarah's progress from a distance. He donated anonymously to the nonprofit supporting her, ensuring she had access to resources and opportunities without feeling beholden to him. Sarah, meanwhile, was making strides toward her goal. She secured a small loan, found a storefront in a bustling part of town, and began renovating the space with the help of friends and volunteers. Margaret even offered to invest, giving Sarah the final boost she needed to bring her vision to life. The grand opening of the bookstore cafe was a community event. The space was warm and inviting, with shelves lined with books, cozy seating areas, and the smell of freshly baked pastries wafting through the air. Sarah couldn't believe it, her dream had finally come true. As customers filled the shop, Sarah spotted Lucas standing near the entrance, watching quietly. He wasn't holding flowers or gifts, just a simple, genuine smile. She approached him, her heart racing. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I wouldn't miss it," Lucas said. "This is incredible, Sarah. You've created something truly special." "Thank you," she said, her voice soft. "For everything." They stood in silence for a moment, the noise of the bustling cafe fading into the background. For the first time, Sarah felt like she could see a path forward, not just for her business, but for herself. "Would you like a cup of coffee?" she asked, surprising herself with the question. Lucas smiled. "I'd love one." As they sat together, talking and laughing like old friends, Sarah realized something important. She wasn't defined by her past or her pain. She was stronger now, more certain of her worth and her dreams. And while she didn't know what the future held, she was ready to face it, with or without Lucas. For now, though, she allowed herself to enjoy the moment. Because sometimes healing wasn't about forgetting, it was about growing. And in that small cafe, surrounded by the warmth of her community and the person who had believed in her when it mattered most, Sarah felt like she was finally home. As the weeks went by, Sarah's bookstore cafe quickly became a cherished spot in the community. Families stopped by for storytime sessions, students worked on projects over steaming cups of coffee, and book lovers spent hours browsing the shelves. Sarah threw herself into every detail, from organizing author events to perfecting her cinnamon roll recipe. Her dedication didn't go unnoticed. Local newspapers wrote glowing reviews, praising the shop for its charm and the welcoming atmosphere Sarah had cultivated. Customers often told her how much they appreciated the space, and their gratitude only fueled her drive to keep improving. Margaret visited regularly, always bringing new ideas. "You should think about a loyalty program," she said one afternoon, sipping a cup of tea. "Something to keep people coming back." Sarah grinned. "You're a genius." Margaret winked. "You're the one making it all happen." Lucas continued his own transformation, though his visits to the cafe remained infrequent. He immersed himself in his community projects, using his family's resources to fund initiatives that addressed education and small business development. The work gave him a new sense of purpose, one that felt far more meaningful than the endless galas and deals he had once prioritized. During a meeting with local business leaders, Lucas was approached by a man named Richard, who ran a small marketing agency. "You're doing good work here," Richard said, shaking Lucas's hand. "It's refreshing to see someone in your position actually care about the community." "Thanks," Lucas replied, surprised by the compliment. "It's been a learning process, but I'm glad to be a part of it." Richard smiled. "If you ever need help getting the word out about your initiatives, let me know. I'd be happy to lend a hand." Lucas nodded, appreciating the offer. He was beginning to see how collaboration and humility could build bridges that wealth alone couldn't. One evening, Lucas decided to stop by the cafe unannounced. The lights were still on, though the sign on the door read closed. Peering through the window, he saw Sarah inside, rearranging a display of new arrivals. She looked focused, her brow furrowed as she stepped back to assess her work. Lucas hesitated before knocking gently on the glass. Sarah looked up, startled, but when she saw him, her expression softened. She unlocked the door and opened it slightly. "We're closed," she said, though her tone wasn't unkind. "I know," Lucas replied. "I just wanted to see how you're doing." Sarah stepped aside, letting him in. "You couldn't have waited until morning?" "I could have," he admitted, smiling sheepishly. "But I didn't want to." She rolled her eyes, but there was a faint smile on her lips. "Fine, come in." Lucas looked around, taking in the cozy space. "It's even better than I remember." "Thanks," Sarah said, crossing her arms. "So, what brings you here, really?" Lucas hesitated, then said, "I missed this place, and I miss talking to you." Sarah's smile faded, replaced by a wary look. "Lucas, I'm not here to make things difficult," he said quickly. "I know you're doing great on your own, and I'm so proud of you. I wanted to see you." Sarah sighed, leaning against the counter. "Why? What do you want from me?" "I don't want anything," Lucas said, his voice soft. "I just wanted to make sure you're okay." Sarah studied him, searching for any sign of ulterior motives. But all she saw was sincerity, and something else, something that tugged at her guarded heart. "I'm fine," she said finally. "Better than fine, actually." Lucas nodded, his expression a mix of relief and admiration. "You deserve it, Sarah. All of it." For a moment, they stood in silence, the weight of unspoken words hanging between them. Then Sarah broke the tension with a small laugh. "You're lucky I like you," she said. "Otherwise, I'd have kicked you out by now." Lucas grinned. "I'll take it." Over time, their conversations became more frequent, though Sarah was careful to set boundaries. She made it clear that her focus was on her business and her future, and Lucas respected that. He helped where he could, connecting her with suppliers, offering advice on expansion plans, but he never overstepped. Their relationship was different now, rooted in mutual respect and understanding. And while Sarah wasn't ready to forgive Lucas entirely, she began to see the changes in him as genuine. The cafe's popularity grew rapidly, bringing with it new opportunities and new challenges. Sarah found herself juggling more than she ever anticipated. Inventory management, employee schedules, marketing, and customer service filled her days, leaving little time to rest. Margaret noticed the strain. "You need help," she said one evening as they closed up. "You can't do everything on your own." I know, Sarah admitted, rubbing her temples. But hiring more staff is expensive, and I'm not sure I'm ready for that yet. Sometimes, taking a risk is the only way to grow, Margaret said gently. You've built something amazing here, Sarah. Don't let fear hold you back. Sarah nodded, knowing Margaret was right. Over the next week, she interviewed and hired 2 new team members, one to manage the kitchen and another to handle customer orders. It was a leap of faith, but it paid off. With the extra help, Sarah finally had the bandwidth to focus on expanding her menu and planning events to draw in more customers. Lucas, meanwhile, was making strides with his community projects, but his relationship with his family remained strained. His mother's disapproval of his choices was palpable, though she rarely voiced it directly. One evening, as the family sat down for dinner, Eleanor addressed him with a pointed tone. I hear you've been spending quite a bit of time in town. Lucas nodded, cutting into his steak. That's right. I've been working on a few initiatives to support local businesses. Is that what you're calling it? Eleanor said, her eyes narrowing. Or is this about that girl? Lucas set down his fork, meeting her gaze. Her name is Sarah, and no, this isn't about her. It's about doing something meaningful with our resources. Eleanor's expression hardened. You're throwing away everything we've built for what? To play savior? I'm not throwing anything away, Lucas said, his voice steady. I'm building something better. His father cleared his throat, breaking the tension. Eleanor, let the boy be. If this is what he wants to do, let him. Eleanor's lips pressed into a thin line, but she didn't argue further. Lucas appreciated his father's rare show of support, but the encounter left him feeling drained. Back at the cafe, Sarah was preparing for a community book fair she had organized. The event was her largest undertaking yet, featuring local authors, storytelling sessions, and discounted books for attendees. The cafe buzzed with excitement as customers browsed the shelves and enjoyed the activities. Midway through the event, Sarah spotted Lucas helping a group of kids select books from a table. He seemed completely at ease, laughing and chatting with the children as if he belonged there. Sarah couldn't help but smile. When he noticed her watching, Lucas walked over, holding up a book. I think I found my next read. Sarah glanced at the cover and raised an eyebrow. A children's book? It's a classic, he said, grinning. Don't judge. Sarah laughed, shaking her head. Thanks for coming. It means a lot. I wouldn't miss it, Lucas said, his tone sincere. This is incredible, Sarah. You've outdone yourself. Thank you, she said, her voice softening. It's been a lot of work, but seeing everyone enjoy it makes it worth it. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the bustling crowd. Then Lucas spoke. Have you thought about what's next? He asked. You've accomplished so much already. Sarah hesitated, then said, I want to expand. Maybe open another location someday. But I need to make sure this one is solid first. Lucas nodded. If anyone can do it, it's you. Sarah smiled, her heart warming at his words. I appreciate that. Later that evening, as Sarah cleaned up after the event, Lucas lingered to help. They worked side by side, chatting about everything from their favorite books to Lucas's latest projects. The tension that had once defined their interactions had eased, replaced by a growing sense of trust. At one point, Lucas paused, his expression thoughtful. Sarah, I know I've said this before, but I want to say it again. I'm sorry for how things started between us. You didn't deserve that. Sarah looked at him, her eyes searching his face. You've changed, Lucas. I can see that. But it's not just about apologizing. It's about what you do moving forward. I know, Lucas said, and I'm trying. Every day. Sarah nodded, her lips curving into a faint smile. Keep trying. That's all anyone can do. As the weeks passed, Sarah continued to build her business, and Lucas found himself increasingly drawn to her world. He attended more events at the cafe, often bringing friends and colleagues to introduce them to the space. Sarah appreciated his support but remained cautious, knowing how fragile trust could be. At the same time, Lucas's work in the community began to attract attention. Local media outlets praised his initiatives, and business leaders started reaching out to collaborate. For the first time, Lucas felt like he was making a difference. One that wasn't tied to his family's name but to his own efforts. Sarah's cafe had become a cornerstone of the community, but success came with its own set of challenges. One morning, as she reviewed her financial statements, she realized the rising costs of supplies and rent were beginning to strain her budget. Expanding the business seemed further away than ever. Margaret noticed her worry. "You look like you've been carrying the world on your shoulders," she said. Sarah sighed, rubbing her temples. "It's just, things are getting tight. I've been doing everything I can to cut costs, but it feels like I'm barely keeping up." Margaret placed a hand on her shoulder. "You've come so far, Sarah. Don't let a bump in the road discourage you. You'll find a way." Meanwhile, Lucas faced his own crossroads. His mother had learned about his continued involvement with Sarah's cafe, and her disapproval boiled over during a family meeting. "You're putting our family's reputation at risk," Eleanor said, her voice cold. "If you continue down this path, don't expect our support." Lucas stood firm, meeting her gaze. "I'm not asking for your support. I've spent my whole life living by your rules, and it's left me empty. I'm done pretending to be someone I'm not." Eleanor's expression was a mix of shock and anger, but Lucas's father spoke up. "If this is what makes you happy, Lucas, then I won't stand in your way. Sometimes, forging your own path is the only way to truly live." Lucas nodded, grateful for his father's words. "Thank you, Dad." Back at the cafe, Sarah was preparing for a major event, a fundraiser to support local literacy programs. It was her most ambitious project yet, and the pressure was immense. On the night of the event, the cafe was packed with supporters, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. That something walked through the door moments later. Lucas, carrying a donation check and a warm smile. "I thought you might need a little help," he said, handing her the check. Sarah's eyes widened as she read the amount. It was more than enough to cover the cafe's recent financial strain and fund the expansion she had been dreaming of. "Lucas, I can't accept this," she said, shaking her head. "It's too much." "It's not a gift," Lucas said gently. "It's an investment. In you, in this place, and in everything you've built. You've created something incredible, Sarah. Let me help you take it to the next level." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes as she looked at him. For so long, she had insisted on doing everything on her own. But Lucas's words reminded her that accepting help didn't make her weak. It made her stronger. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Lucas smiled. "You don't have to thank me. Just keep doing what you're doing." The fundraiser was a resounding success, raising enough money to support the literacy programs and set the stage for the cafe's expansion. Sarah felt a sense of accomplishment she had never known before, and for the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future where her dreams continued to grow. As the night wound down and the last guests left, Sarah and Lucas sat together in the quiet cafe, the faint hum of the city outside the windows. "You've changed a lot," Sarah said, breaking the silence. "So have you," Lucas replied. "You've always been strong, but now you know it." Sarah smiled, her heart full. "I couldn't have done it without you." Lucas reached for her hand, his touch warm and steady. "And I couldn't have become who I am without you. You showed me what really matters." They sat in silence, their connection deeper than words could express. For the first time, they both felt at peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because they had found their way through the imperfections together. In the months that followed, the cafe expanded to a second location, and Sarah became a respected figure in the community. Lucas continued his work in local development, using his influence to create meaningful change. Their paths weren't always easy, but they walked them side by side, building a future rooted in love, respect, and shared purpose. And in the end, it wasn't the wealth or the success that defined their story. It was the courage to believe in each other and the strength to rise above the challenges that tried to hold them back.